Okay, right. Off we go. So thank you for joining us. I'm Michelle Storer. I'm a director at Hayes, and I'm responsible for the partnerships that we have with multi-academy trusts and other organisations up and down the country, including the Foundation for Education Development. So we've been partnering with FED over the last 12 months, bringing thought leaders and education practitioners together through a series of seminars and face-to-face events, including today's session. So you're all very welcome to join us here. We have another session happening next week in Brighton with Sir Anthony Selden. So if anybody's in that area and is interested to come along to that, then obviously get in touch and let us know, and we can add you to that. Another of our partnerships is the UK Literacy Association, who we've worked with for a number of years. One of the ways that we work with them is the sponsorship of the UK Literacy School of the Year. And we have with us today Sequinder Samra, who's head teacher of Elmhurst Primary School in Newham, who were last year's winner of the UK Literacy Association Literacy School of the Year. I've visited Elmhurst a number of times and seen the brilliant work that they do, not only on literacy, but also Oracy. So delighted to have Sequinder with us today to talk about the great work that they're doing there, along with the other members of our panel. And Joe's going to talk you through a little bit more about FED and also introduce you more fully to our panel. So before any more ado, the session is being recorded, so we can circulate that afterwards, along with any slides or any recommendations that come up throughout. Any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat and we can pick those up throughout the session or at the end, whichever is most appropriate. So without further ado, over to you, Joe.
Thanks so much, Michelle. A very welcome to you all for joining us this sunny June afternoon. And I know actually we've got some people from outside the UK, so I hope it is a warm and pleasant evening or a welcoming morning for you. We really do appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join this discussion about the power of Oracy. I'm Jo, and I work for the FED, as Michelle just said, and I've done so for over 3 years. Prior to this, I worked for 10 years on a global dialogue project, so I'm heavily invested in this sort of work, alongside actually one of our panelists, Neil, who you're going to hear from later. And we did this work together, and Neil continues to do this work at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change on a programme called Generation Global. But before we move on to the power of Oracy, just a little bit about the FED, the Foundation for Education Development, is just over 4 years old. And its mission is to rethink and help to redesign how education policy is made, implemented, and governed. In short, we offer practical long-term planning solutions for education. And over the past 4 years, we've listened very deeply to thousands of stakeholders about their lived experience of the system, and this has informed our proposals, which themselves have been endorsed by our different groups. And those groups are made up of learners, parents and carers, business leaders, practitioners, educational leaders, and we have a special SEND and AP group because that's such a massive issue facing the sector at the moment. In a moment, I'll put in the chat a link to our teaser paper, which we released just on Sunday, which we put out ahead of our report. Our next report will be launched at the House of Lords on July the 9th. You'll be able to read an awful lot more about our 4 proposals for stronger policy making in education. But back to today, and the reason that you're here, hugely thankful to Jeff Barton, to Sequinder Samra, to Dr. Neil Phillipson and Emily Thomas for sharing their expertise and their experiences with us today. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, so you'll hear from them in a moment. Do put any questions into the chat or the Q&A. We'll keep our eye on both of those. And I'm presuming, having done so many webinars over the past few years, you'll be familiar with those. We'll endeavour to answer as many as possible. So, Jeff, I'm going to hand over to you. I'd like you to introduce yourself, if you would, for those of the attendees today who are not quite familiar with the legend that you are. And also, if you tell us
You've been drinking.
Not yet. And if you tell us a little about what you're learning in your new role, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Very good. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us wherever you happen to be on the beautiful planet we inhabit. So my name is Jeff Barton. I am a grizzled old English teacher by background, and I became an English teacher because I was taught by an extraordinary English teacher, and I had never thought I'd become an English teacher, but because of him, I did. And then kind of progressed over 32 years, became a head teacher of a comprehensive school for 15 years, and then stepped into being a union leader looking after school and college leaders across the UK, 25,000 of them, for 7 years. So that's my background. I've stepped out of that now, and I'm going back to my English teacher roots in a sense. And when you're ready, Joe, I'll just give a little overview of what we're doing about Oracy now, why we think it matters now, and just sense check some of the emerging ideas around Oracy. But let's see whether you want to introduce the other people before I let rip.
Actually, I think that'd be rather nice before you let rip, Jeff. So, Sequinder, do you want to just do a brief introduction, and then we'll go to Neil and then to Emily, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. So, yeah, my name's Sequinder Samra. I've been a head teacher at Elmhurst for 6 years. I've been head of school longer. I've been a senior leader for over 20 years. I've always worked in sort of urban, inner city areas in London. I fell into primary education. I was a secondary science teacher, and this was going back a very, very long time ago. A friend of mine asked me to come and see her school, and I just loved primary teaching. I was a year 6 teacher for many, many years. And at Elmhurst, we've been on a bit of a journey in terms of Oracy, but I think we're going to talk about that a bit later. So I won't talk about that right now. All right, thank you.
Hi everybody, my name's Neil Phillipson. I'm an erstwhile science teacher and head of secondary science. My last full-time job in schools was a head of science in Stoke-on-Trent. I work for a number of different organisations now, so I'm involved in teacher training with a local SCIT, school-centred ITT provider. I work with Oracy Cambridge. I'm an associate of Oracy Cambridge and Neil Mercer's group down there. Very much interested in philosophy for children. I'm a P4C trainer with SAPRA P4C. And as Joe mentioned earlier, I still work with her former organisation, Generation Global, facilitating dialogues between children in classrooms around the world. So yeah, I do all sorts of different things. Joe kindly introduced me as Dr. Neil Phillipson, but I have to come clean and say that title belongs to something about organic chemistry many, many years ago and is not particularly relevant or qualifying to me talking about education. So forget that.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily Thomas. I'm a primary teacher in Harrow, and I'm also the Oracy leader here at Pinnerwood School. I also work quite closely with the Big Education and have just finishing a 2-year programme with them called the Big 10. Oracy for us has been a priority for about 4 years, and it's changed everything we do, but I'll talk to you more about that later, I'm sure. And we've just been recognised as a Centre of Excellence with Voice 21.
Thanks, everybody. So, Jeff, back over to you. So take it away.
Yeah, let me spend just 10 minutes or so talking about what is Oracy. Frankly, I'm surrounded here by people who know what Oracy is, but nevertheless, let's just go back to basics a little bit, because Oracy is one of those words where people might bring their own interpretation to it. And I'll just talk through what we've been trying to do as a commission on Oracy. So what's Oracy? Why now? I think we are poised at a moment when things are about to change, not just because we've got a general election in the UK, but because frankly, things in lots of our classrooms need to change. We need to get the joy back into our classrooms, both for the teachers and for the young people. We need to do more on behalf of employers. We need to do more on behalf of our democracy, which needs people who can disagree, but can disagree agreeably. And Oracy is a really important part of that. So the why now bit, and then let me just sense check some of the things that our commission on Oracy is probably going to recommend. We've got our next meeting on Thursday, final meeting coming up next month, but I'll give you a sneak preview of what I think is the direction of travel there. And with all of this, if I say stuff which isn't clear or you disagree with or you want to heckle online or whatever, use the chat and I'm more than happy to respond to that. But I'll use about 10 minutes or so, no more. So in terms of the what is Oracy, Oracy's been around for a long time, right? The term Oracy really comes about in the 1960s, 1970s. Andrew Wilkinson developed it. And the trouble is that unlike literacy and unlike numeracy, people's eyes flicker a little bit about precisely what it is. And what that can lead to is they then put it alongside numeracy and literacy. Now, one of the things when I was invited by Voice 21 to be an independent chair of an independent commission, right, looking at the impact of oracy in education, one of the things that I said we needed to try and do is to make it punch outside the education echo chamber. So you had more people, people who don't work in education, knowing what oracy is. And therefore, it would strike me as bizarre if in chairing an oracy commission, what I was then doing was writing a written report, and that was the end of our business. So if you haven't noticed, one of the things that we have been doing is curating a series of conversations, which we post on a Monday, we post on a Thursday, and they're conversations with different people. Some of them are absolute experts in oracy, so sociolinguists, for example, professors of linguistics. Some of them are people who are working in the theatre. Some of them are people who are working with young people who've got particular needs. We're doing one about British Sign Language and why that matters. So we're trying to give a sense of why oracy in its most inclusive sense matters on behalf of children and young people and matters on behalf of the profession. And if you just look at Spotify and just type in Oracy Commission, you'll be able to hear some of those conversations, including one that for me particularly crystallizes why this matters, and that is with Professor Robin Alexander, one of the great gurus of this stuff, who talks about if you're a teacher and you ask a question of a pupil and the pupil gives an answer, that is really not your job done. It's what happens next. He calls it the third term, where you make a decision about what else is happening, who else do I need to talk to in the room. So part of what I'm learning through all of this is something I knew instinctively as an English teacher. This is about re-empowering a teaching profession to see that part of their repertoire, their toolbox, their craft is fundamentally the way in which they are both using language themselves, giving children an opportunity to use language, and critically, this is becoming more important than ever, I think, listening and responding to what those youngsters are doing. You'll see that the theme of active, critical listening in an age when everyone is cross about everything all the time has become more and more important. So I think we're probably starting to make a case around why oracy is important, why it matters. And part of what we're trying to do there is to say, look, this isn't about teachers of humanities and teachers of drama. So the very first of the commission conversations I did was with David Thomas. He's a national expert in maths. And what he says is if you look at the performance of our kids in maths, at primary, we have got some of the best performing children in mathematics in the world, right? But something then happens when they go into Key Stage 3, because maths suddenly changes to becoming, have you got a right answer or a wrong answer? And he says, the reality is, if you went and studied mathematics at university, you would fundamentally be expected to justify and explain and articulate your answer. In other words, language is really important to mathematics, partly the conversations you are having with yourself when you get stuck on a problem, and partly your ability to explain to someone else why your proposed solution is stronger than someone else's proposed solution. So this notion of disciplinary oracy. So what does oracy look like if you're teaching history, whether as a primary or a secondary teacher? What does it look like if you're a maths teacher, for example? That's becoming a really important theme for us. So I think the what of oracy is kind of converging, and we're starting to get a really clear definition. And frankly, most of you will already have your own clear definitions. We want this to cut through to the wider public. Why now? Well, the reason we're doing it now is that 50 years ago this year, the Bullock report called Language for Life made a number of recommendations about the importance of language across the curriculum, including speaking and listening, as they called it. They didn't call it oracy then. And what they essentially said was, children will be liberated if every teacher in every subject has a deeper understanding of the language they are both using themselves, but helping children with the language. And that is basically learning to talk, it's basically learning through talk, and it's learning about talk. Added to all of that is listening as well, the ability to do that with listening. So that was 50 years ago that was being said. And what we've seen is there are various evangelists, some of them online here, who are doing that kind of thing in their schools or their colleges now. But what we're saying is, with a new government coming in, which has said quite emphatically that oracy is going to be part of what they do, that this is our moment to make this an entitlement for every child and every young person. So let me finish by saying why I think some of the emerging themes that we've got are emerging. So first of all, we think that this is really important for children and young people. We'll probably talk about technology later on. If it's us against the robots, one of the things that human beings have got is that sense of their identity, of telling their own story, of relating to the great stories of our culture. Language enables us to do that. And frankly, we need more opportunities for children to be able to do it. We also think that this is really good and really important for teachers, because you will know as well as I did that last year 44,000 teachers left the profession in England alone, and only 50% have been re-recruited. So we've got a massive hemorrhaging of teachers. And part of the reason we would say about that is if you are a graduate and you want to be able to work from home, and you want to have, you know, three days at home, 2 days in the office, teaching is unlikely to be for you. It's going to be difficult. So what does teaching in a 21st century profession look like? Well, one of the things we need to do is to build up that extraordinary craft of being a teacher. And just like my old English teacher, Roy Sampson, inspired me to become one, to help teachers regain a sense of agency, rather than what too often they tell us it feels like them simply being told if you had a knowledge organizer and you did this and had silent corridors, then all would be well. The reality is we have to give teachers a greater sense that they are going to customize the knowledge for their children around the class they've got, and Oracy will be an important part. And the other reason we think there are some emergent themes is democracy feels fragile at the moment. Young people at 16 are going to be given the vote if Labour comes in 7 days' time. All the more reason, therefore, we want young people to understand the importance of being able to debate, disagree, and to do it agreeably. Employers want that. Society more broadly needs that. So Oracy, it seems to us, is incredibly timely, partly because we're poised between the Brooke report of 50 years ago and a new incoming government, and partly because we've got a government that is going to do a curriculum review and is going to give a higher priority to professional development of teachers. And what we would be saying is Oracy has to be a higher priority for every teacher in every subject at every phase, because it's in the interest of children and young people. It's in the interest, ultimately, pretentiously, of our democracy as well. And Joe, I hope that's just given a little bit of a quick flavour of the kind of work the Oracy Commission has been doing and is continuing to do.
That was superb. Thank you, Jeff. That was a really rich overview. And I've put a link to the podcast in the chat. I'm a big fan of them. They're lovely. Some of them are just bite-sized, even 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Others are a bit longer, 20, 24 minutes. But yeah, check them out if you are inspired by what you hear in today's webinar. So Sequinda and Neil and Emily, oh, she's back, great. If you could just spend 3 minutes, if that's at all possible, just to give those on the webinar a little taste of what you've been doing at your school, and the kind of, where are you on this journey and what do you want to do in the future? Neil, I know you don't work at one particular school, so you'll be more general. If you could just let people know specifically what you're doing with Oracy Cambridge and also with Generation Global, that would be wonderful. So can we go to Sequinda and then Emily first, because they're in our schools, and then over to you, Neil, please. Sequinda, thank you.
Thank you. The notifications keep coming on my computer. Apologies, I can't seem to switch them off. So I've been at my school, at Elmhurst Primary School, since 2001. The previous head teacher was here for about a year and then he left. And when I came here, I thought I was, you know, the 90s TV series based on a book, The Demon Head Teacher, Headmaster. It was like, I felt like there was something wrong with children because they were so quiet. Every single class I went into, it was like pin drop silence. And the demographics here are the children are mainly from the Indian subcontinent. We've got high numbers with EAL, so children who start nursery still who don't speak English. They've got community languages. So I was told by then the previous head teacher, who was a white head teacher, that he told me as an Asian deputy that it was natural and normal for children, Asian children, to not talk, and that was part of their kind of cultural and linguistic makeup. And I thought this doesn't sound right at all. You know, children want to express themselves. And so one of the first things we did was get children talking and have a voice. And we've not looked back since. We've looked at how to bring in Oracy, you know, we looked at best practice. We looked at practice from the state sector, but also from private schools. And I wanted the very best for our children here. It's quite a deprived community in Newham. And so one of the things I've always been passionate about is teaching debating formally. So we've been teaching debate. We've got a very rich debating programme. We've been working with DebateMate, an amazing charity, for over 15 years. And our children from year 2 start debating. And so at any given time, there are 100 children who are attending some sort of after school or in school debating programme. We've got a speech making programme that we've written ourselves, which is we've got an appointed Oracy lead, like Emily. We brought in we basically brought in Oracy across the curriculum, but also you know, we've got a very vibrant Shakespeare programme that we've had now in its 13th year. So we work with Shakespeare Schools Foundation. It's been one of the best things we've given our children. Anybody in Key Stage 2, it's not for those who are more able. Actually, we've had a child who was in one of the lowest groups for literacy, and he performed Richard III. And his dad cried when he saw him. He thought, I didn't know my son could do that. One of the big things we're working on at the moment is, in spite of having partner talk and it being a pedagogy, we've said, you know, if a question's worth asking, it's worth everybody answering to get that engagement, rather than those children always put up their hands and always get chosen. We feel like that's a kind of, you know, and what we've had 20 years on, still in Key Stage 2, we've got children who are still putting up their hands because the teacher's still rewarding them. So we're doing a bit of a case study at the moment about trying to eradicate all hands up and have everybody, it's everybody's right to have a voice, to speak and to be heard. But I don't know, we can talk about that another time, but that's a bit of a snapshot, really. There's lots more that we do, but it's a bit of a snapshot. Thank you.
That was perfect. 3 minutes. Well done, Sequinder. Emily, same from you, please.
So for us, it all started with a visit to School 21, which I'm sure you've all heard of. And my head, I didn't actually get to go, but my head went with another colleague, and they came back and they were like, wow, this is a different way of doing things. Like, this is what we need to be doing. So kind of from then on, that was 4 years ago, things have like skyrocketed. And I always think, like, if you look back, like, what did we do before? Because Oracy is part of everything we do here at Pinnerwood. It's the golden thread. So it's the center of our pedagogy, it's part of our culture, it's our curriculum is all centered around Oracy, our behavior policy, absolutely everything we do, how we include our community, is all done through Oracy. And opportunities for purposeful and exploratory talk is at the center of kind of what we do here. And it's kind of what you have to do if you know, come to work at Pinnerwood, you're on board with Oracy, and that's what we do here. I think when we first started, a lot of people say, oh yeah, I do speaking and listening. And if I ever go and talk at other schools or work with other people, they go, yeah, we do speaking and listening, and they kind of brush you off, and you go, oh, okay, let me just correct you there. So then you just do a little bit more digging, and you find that actually talk's not being planned in so well, or it's not been thought about. And actually, you know, having your teachers think about every time that you ask for talk partners, or every time you think, oh, am I going to put that in a trio, or I work as a group? How am I going to do this? And what setup am I doing for that? And I went to the conference in Cambridge on Wednesday, and I was listening to Voice 21 speak about a deficit narrative. And I think that's really, really prominent in our education system at the moment, just about what the children can't do. And I think, you know, as teachers, it's being downtrodden by the system. I could go on, but it's, oh, the children can't work in groups, they can't stand up and do a speech in front of everybody, of course they can't do that. And you think, well, you haven't taught them any of the skills to do that. So that's what we do here. We have a really strong speech making program, like you, Sequinder, the same as your school. And this year we've done for the first time, we've done some year 6 change speeches. So the children have written speeches about sustainability. And then we had a speech evening over 3 nights where we invited people from the council, people from local recycling plants, and people who work in sustainability to actually come to listen to the children's speeches so that they know that their voice has a purpose. And I think at year 6, that's a really poignant moment before you move into secondary school. So that's a little bit about us.
Perfect. Brilliant, Emily. And I know you'll have plenty to say about this, about the teaching and learning of these skills associated with Oracy, Neil. So you're perfect for us to move on to now. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jo. Well, as I said, I sort of work these days for a variety of organisations, but if there is a thread that runs through, at least runs through most of my work, then it is Oracy. And perhaps in my case, more specifically, it's dialogue and dialogic teaching and learning. Just sort of zooming in on that phrase for a moment, etymologically, we can interpret dialogue to mean reasoning or speaking across difference. I love that phrase, really, the ability to reason across difference. And I think it's just so very important in so many walks of life, well beyond education, actually. I'll just say a few bits about some of those wider benefits of teaching for dialogue before coming back to my work with Oracy Cambridge and dialogue in the classroom. So, for example, if I'm doing philosophy for children with a group of young people, they'll be working together in a community that we've carefully built, a community of inquiry. And they might be exploring these differences, different perspectives on things like philosophical concepts like justice or bravery or beauty and so on. And in doing so, they'll come to realize that there are different perspectives on these things. They'll expand their awareness of the different ways of looking at these things and their significance in their lives and their significance in other children's lives. In short, I think philosophy, a love of wisdom, we hope they develop their wisdom through that dialogue. Jo mentioned Generation Global, and on that platform we bring together young people from around the world for the dialogues about things that matter to them, be that things like hate speech or the rights of women and girls or climate change and so on. And I think an important part of that is helping them to identify as global citizens, so with agency to go out and do something about these issues, at least through the power of their oracy. So for me, I think these kinds of practices are preparing children to take their place in a democratic society. And not just in the distant future, but actually now, here and now, they're taking their first steps into the public sphere, and I think that's something that is a really important part or outcome of education. But I also think these kind of practices are also great preparation, great foundations for dialogue in the classroom, which is something I'm also passionate about, dialogic teaching and learning. And I think there are gaps, there are differences in perspective between teachers and our students. Certainly, personal and social differences, but also academically. So just to illustrate that, my understanding of this poem as a teacher of English versus your understanding as perhaps a novice, perhaps an everyday reader. My understanding of the meaning of the word freezing as a representative of the discipline of science. Your understanding as a user of the word freezing in the everyday sense, it's blooming cold in here. So I think, in the classroom, as in all other walks of life, it's so easy for us to talk past each other, to fail to understand each other. And that's why I think dialogic practices are such an important part of a teacher's pedagogical repertoire. Dialogic teaching and learning allows us to genuinely listen to each other, to hear each other, which sounds trivial, but actually is harder than it seems. And it enables us to work together to collaboratively construct and reconstruct a richer understanding of some pivotal concepts and ideas. It's so important to a real deep foundation for curriculum learning. So, in short, I think this ability to reason across difference is I think it could save. It's needed to save the world, in my view. This ability to reason across difference. I think it's a profoundly important outcome of education in its own right. But I also think it's a really important part of effective teaching and learning in the curriculum. So I'm sort of here, therefore, as an advocate of, the educational value of dialogue. Thank you, Jo.
Wow, I'm feeling very, very, very inspired. That last well, not the last phrase, but a phrase you used there about talking past each other, taking me back to my Generation Global days, where we talked about the fact that sometimes in oracy and dialogue, we do train young people or teach young people the skills of speaking, but sometimes we forget that they also need to be taught how to listen actively in an engaged way, and that's a key part of oracy, certainly for me as well. Well done, everybody. As a reward, I'm going to give you a really difficult question to start off our panel part of the session. And for those who are listening in, if you could also, taking part in the dialogue today, put your questions in the chat that we will we'll put to the panel. They can be as difficult or as easy as you want, she says, not having to answer them. So here is the first question for you. It's in two parts. One of the themes that we've promised those who signed up for this webinar that we would cover is around oracy and technology. So could we have your comments, please, on two things? First of all, from your perspective, how do you see technology currently impacting on children and young people's oracy skills? So that's the first question, or first thing to comment on. And secondly, what are the opportunities for using technology in the teaching and learning of oracy? Who'd like to start us off?
I don't mind starting. I think it's a bit of a mixed picture. I'm not a really massive fan of too much technology. I think it needs to be used very, very purposefully in schools. I mean, are we talking wider or just in schools, or generally the impact on schools?
However you want, really, yeah, but you know, those two parts that you see impacting on the children, but also what are the opportunities?
So, I mean, I've noticed that new parents, children in the early years, do not interact with their children like they used to. So I've definitely seen that. The children are being given phones, very young children in nursery, whilst they're waiting to go into their classes. So I think that, you know, later on when children start to also do a lot of gaming and a lot of online activities, that social aspect of communication and talking to each other has been affected. Children are more observing talk rather than being active partakers of talk. Having said that, I think that we do have, if we didn't have technology, if we didn't have the ability to be able to research and use that in schools, our oracy would be poorer. For example, in debating, we use, children have to research facts, and because they've got facts at their fingertips, they're able to kind of navigate more content and be quite discerning in that. And I know that there's more scope in terms of online, well curated online discussions that young people can also benefit from. In our part of our debating programme, the teacher uses, it's called Flipgrid? I hope that's the right platform. I have Flipboard, so it videos all their debates, and then they go back and they kind of deconstruct those. So so there's just a few thoughts in terms of that.
Joe, can I just make a few comments on technology? I'm not an expert on this. There's a great quote, which you probably all know, by Douglas Adams, who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And he said, I've come up with a set of rules that describe our reactions to technologies. First one, anything that is in the world when you're born is normal and ordinary and is just a natural part of the way the world works. Second, anything that's invented between when you're 15 and 35 is new and exciting and revolutionary, and you can probably get a career in it. Third, anything invented after you're 35 is against the natural order of things, right? Now, what we've got are these digital native children and young people with parents who aren't digital natives, and we're still navigating our way as a society about what should we and what should we not do, when should we give them smartphones. And if you've read Jonathan Haidt's book, H-A-I-D-T, Jonathan Haidt, I think is how you pronounce it, which is called The Anxious Generation, he's saying that smartphones to children before the age of 14, and indeed he says 16, is disastrous, and gives us quite a kind of catastrophizing narrative about exactly what we've heard, how it is damaging the normal human relationship between the older generation and the younger generation. So it's easy for us to get sucked into that narrative, I think. And I think schools probably are going to have to do more in terms of policing all of that stuff. On the other hand, going back to your second part of your question, if you've used any of the new AI stuff, so I've got on my phone a thing called Claude. They've just done a new version of Claude. And I put into it, create a PowerPoint about the Tudors for me. Within 15 seconds, it'll give me a PowerPoint with facts about the Tudors. Now, I can't leave it to AI to have done that. But as a teacher, what I can now do is to bring my historical knowledge and say, which bits of this do I want and which bits do I not want? And I think it's going to create some extraordinary opportunities for teachers and doing some of the heavy lifting of workload and stuff. But we are going to have to be a lot stronger, I think, in helping parents in particular to know what is and isn't appropriate with children. And that's a difficult territory, and very difficult territory for schools to step into at a time when the relationship between parents and schools is in too many cases under stress at the moment. But it's a particularly difficult space for a government to step into, because they don't want to be accused of being nanny statist and telling parents how to conduct themselves, if you know what I mean.
If I can just jump in there, I think that'd be a good point. Just thinking about what we've done at Pinner Wood, we've tried to kind of find that harmonious balance, I suppose. So all of our homework is online, like in most schools these days. But one of the things that we've done, which is probably a practical thing that some of you can take away, is an Oracy homework. So like it's just a talking point or an odd one out, or a would you rather, something that children can talk about with their families. And we really, really encourage that for the kind of dinner time discussion, because as we know, like, that's not happening so much. Lives are very busy these days, and we thought after COVID it would all slow down, but it hasn't. It's just ramped back up again. And so there's not so much time for families to have discussions. So that's something we've done. We found it really beneficial. And in fact, that's the most the homework that everybody does. It's like, oh, well, I won't do my spellings, reading, or maths. I'll leave that bit. But the Oracy, I'm doing that because it's just a discussion. You kind of press record, you leave the iPad or phone or whatever in the corner, and then the discussion happens really organically, and then they press send. And I think as a feedback we've had is that that's been really good. It's always to just get those children that are more reluctant as well to do their homework. But also thinking about using technology, we do an end of year speech. The children, when they have their report, in partnership with their report written by the teacher, the children do a speech from nursery all the way to year 6. And we've done that for the last 4 years. And it's a whole program that we do, a whole teaching with English. But then it's uploaded to our platform, and families can go back and they can watch it year on year. So I suppose it's just using the technology to the benefit of what you're already doing. They would already be making the speech, but by recording it, it just interweaves that life, that technology, which we know they're going to be using anyway. So I think it's like, you can't really fight it. You've just got to kind of mold and manipulate for it to suit you best, I think. Thank you.
I could add a little bit. I think the technology has the potential to really help Oracy and dialogue. But one thing I think is it's incumbent on us to model its use in a positive way. I hope this anecdote's relevant, but I was talking with the head teacher just last week as a conference, and she'd recently had her first article published in Impact magazine from the Chartered College, and she was very pleased and proud of it. And she put it on Twitter to say, here's my first article. And she'd been quote tweeted by a well-known opponent of what we're trying to do in Oracy education. And the quote tweet was simply, above her tweet was simply an eye roll, an eye roll emoji. And that was it. I just found that really interesting, because to me that just illustrates the need for all of us to learn how to be, and I'm going to use that word again, to be more dialogic in our interactions. That person just completely shutting down. And actually, I think these two people weren't very far apart in their views on Oracy education. There were some differences, but there were certainly some similarities. Just one eye roll emoji says, I'm not interested in talking to you. So it just made me think that we need to model, we need to do better, on social media and so on. But certainly I'd benefit. I don't know very much about technology, But the Generation Global platform I've already mentioned enables us to bring young people from around the world together in one place, which I think is very powerful. And just building slightly on what Jeff was saying about AI, I think it's also kind of good to have a dialogue with. You know, it's amazing to me what AI can do. And recently I've had a discussion with it about the relative merits of teaching speaking and reasoning in a generic sense across the curriculum or in a subject-specific sense. And we had a really rich, I think, you know, a dialogue about it. So I think there's great potential. It's just that, of course, we need to model how to use it well, perhaps. I don't know if I'm allowed to promote other people's organisations, Joe, but I know Rupert Wegerif, who's a colleague who I've learned a lot about dialogue from, and his great passion is also technology. So the Digital Education Futures Initiative, DEFI Cambridge, is a good site to have a look at, some great examples of how technology can enable dialogue and oracy. I'd recommend it.
Neil, if you could put a link in the chat to DEFI, that would be great. Yeah, and their work is fabulous. We've got some great questions coming in, which shows some really strong listening skills on this part of those that are attending this webinar. So I'm going to take Kate Bridges' question, and I'm just going to broaden it a little bit. Hi, Kate, by the way. Kate is co-chair of our Education Practitioners Council at FED. She says that some subjects lend themselves to discussion more than others. Got my eyes on you for this one, Neil. But of course, everybody can answer this. And she says that in some subjects like physics and maths, students feel the less need for discussion. Is that the case? And what do you recommend? But also, I'd like to broaden that into, should we be looking at oracy as a discrete area of the curriculum, or should we be taking much more of a kind of pedagogical approach to the inclusion of oracy in our schools, no matter what the phase? Let's start with you, Neil, and then we'll move on to the others to take that question.
Perhaps I'll speak from my experience as a science teacher, and being one of those subjects listed there as where it might be conceived that there's less need for talk. And I really don't think that. You know, I think there's various areas in which talk's really important. I think we don't talk enough about epistemology or science as a way of knowing. I think there's good, rich philosophical conversations to be had there with children in science. I think there's lots of ethics around science that needs exploring with young people, but also, as I said earlier, that, you know, just to try and get rich conceptual understanding in science, it needs talk. So I think, you know, of course, we all hear a lot of these days about direct instruction and very careful explanation of tricky ideas to children and modelling and so on. And of course, that's essential. You try teaching without it. That's really important. But I would argue that it's never sufficient, because you can't just transmit an understanding of a complex idea from one brain to another. We'll all make sense of it in our own ways by connecting it to the existing knowledge in our own heads. We'll always slightly have to, you know, end up with different understandings. And so I think the ability for a teacher to switch between that authoritative transmissive mode of teaching and then to switch into a more dialogic mode where they invite the students to express what sense they've made of that which is being taught, and to recognize that each of them have made some slightly different understandings of it, and to work together to reconstruct those understandings, I think is a really important part of a teacher's pedagogical repertoire, and is as important in science as anywhere else, I think.
I totally agree, and we've been privileged to work as a lead school for a maths hub with places like Shanghai and sort of higher performing jurisdictions, and seeing that teaching for mastery, where, you know, you get the answer out of the way, not even interested in the answer. We actually need to think about, all right, what, you know, how do we know that 3 and 3 is 6? And previously, you would only have had maybe a couple of, you know, quite procedural answers. And now the reasoning, that rich talk and reasoning, is really helping children to really make those connections and develop that kind of fluency and understanding that we've never had before. I think there's a whole revolution happening in primary maths. And it's very much, it centres on talk, really, because you can't, you know, not all can actually reason in a written form to the same level in terms of their mathematical understanding. And that's why the talk is just so important, is that kind of bridge, really.
Emily, you next, then I'll add a few platitudes at the end.
Right, super. I was just thinking about that part of your question, Joe, which said about should we be teaching Oracy explicitly, or is it part of the pedagogy? And like this was something that we debated for quite a long time. And personally, I think part of the joy of Oracy is its flexibility and its ability to enhance any area of the curriculum. I think the danger is if you have like a separate Oracy curriculum that you have on Thursdays. We do Oracy now. We're doing it in this section when that's not the point, is it at all? We know that Oracy gives children agency and choice over language, and it's permeated through the whole, not only the curriculum or education, but like your life. So I think there is the tendency that it could be quite dangerous if you keep it to one kind of 30-minute slot on a Tuesday. Then I wouldn't be a fan of that. I'm more of a fan of the pedagogy style.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, one of the things I found in being appointed to chair this commission on Oracy in education is that you've got some people who are saying, oh, you should create like an Oracy hour, like we used to have the numeracy hour and the literacy hour. I think there is no appetite from the profession, who are weary and have already got too clogged a curriculum for that kind of stuff. On the other hand, I do think there are two ideas which are emerging. One is, if we really want children to be able to debate rationally about climate change, let's say, then the best place they should do that is in their science lesson, their geography lesson, their RE lesson, whatever it might be. And therefore, making sure that teachers understand that that's part of their repertoire and the curriculum gives space for some of those controversial subjects. I think that's really important. But the other thing is, if we agree that citizenship, civics, democracy matter even more than ever in a fractious time, then there are things that schools are already doing: assemblies, tutor time, citizenship lessons, PSHE. What do we know that good practice looks like, and how can we make that an entitlement for everyone? So you can see that partly that then is about what resides in the classroom with their subject teachers, but partly it's about the other time that we've already got. None of that is shoehorning extra time in. It's saying, what can we learn from it? One of the things I think we will be doing as a commission when we launch our report at the Labour conference at the end of September is to make a number of proposals about teacher training and ongoing teacher development, about citizenship curriculum and doing a fast review, of saying, you're going to do, Labour, a curriculum and assessment review. Here's the kind of things we think you should look at. And we are definitely going to be proposing that GCSE English language, which is a terrible qualification, should become about GCSE English language. It should teach children about the history of our language, the influences of our language, how we all change our language in different contexts, that accents change and all of that kind of stuff. And one of the net effects of that will be English teachers in secondary who traditionally come from a literature background will learn more about the language and be able to teach more explicitly about language, and therefore will join up what kids are learning at the end of primary with what they then need to learn through secondary. And I think they'll just love learning it because it's such an interesting topic. So you can see there's some emerging themes here, which are actually, if anything, joining up different bits of the curriculum, and I hope putting some joy back into the profession.
Fabulous. I'm hoping we've got time for 3 more questions that have come through the chat. I'm going to ask one that's come from somebody on the webinar who is not UK based. And Sandia asks if there are any noticeable gender differences in terms of children engaging in Oracy in the classroom in your experience. And also she was quite fascinated, Sequinda, and disturbed about the Asian kids don't speak comments, that came from your previous leader. And just wondered whether there are any challenges around multicultural approaches to the teaching and learning of Oracy. And it might well speak to that deficit model that you were talking about earlier. And I know, Jeff, you might have some things to say based on your conversations with the likes of Ian Cushing and others. So could we touch on that issue of really around how do we ensure that Oracy is inclusive in our schools and our classrooms? Thank you.
Should I respond? Yeah. So, you know, that was a comment from over 20 years ago, and I'd like to think that's no longer that we hold these kind of perceptions and stereotypes about certain groups being just naturally inherently quiet, because actually all children like to talk and communicate and engage and feel included in their learning. And I think this thing about everyone being given a voice, you know, once you start to empower children, there's really no stopping them. And we give lots of language, sentence stems. That was a previous, you know, question, like in maths. There's a lot to hang language on. And a lot of support that we give, particularly because our learners are still developing their fluency in English. And that then means that the structures of, for example, mathematical structures, they can easily go to them and be able to articulate them and understand them if we are giving them lots and lots of that kind of scaffolding in terms of the language. So one of the great things that we did, very simple, was what's the same and what's different? Even that as questions to frame in terms of understanding, okay, like patterns in numbers was really, really useful. We've not noticed, we've got a lot of, we've got quite a few girls at the moment in our debating team. At the moment, we're actually leading nationally in the debate competition. We're going to Manchester University next week, I believe, for the finals. It is a girl-heavy group at the moment, but it's not always been like that. I think it just, you know, I'm not sure exactly what's happened this year in terms of the squad, but certainly the engagement's been, you know, from boys and girls has been there. And as a way of ensuring that boys have a voice, and in that sense, being able to be, you know, regulated and feel happy. You know, Emily's talked about their behaviour curriculum, their behaviour policy. I think when there's a massive kind of focus on Oracy, and it's there, and it's from a structural level, it's there, and it's an expectation. It's you know, everybody is involved in talking. It means that, you know, children feel included, and particularly boys, that being really active in all their subjects, including literacy, because there's been a lot of research in terms of, you know, boys and literacy and not feeling. So I don't feel that there's necessarily a gender sort of bias in terms of one being more, you know, more sort of, you know, feeling more engaged than others, really, from personal experience.
Thank you. Jeff, can we move over to you?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm very conscious of, and you mentioned Ian Cushing, who's at Manchester Metropolitan University. He is a very useful lightning rod on all of this, because as soon as you talk about Oracy, he reminds us that the origins of Oracy, as he puts it, from Andrew Wilkinson, the 1960s, were based on a deficit model, that they were based on the idea that we, the middle classes, know better than you how you should be speaking. And although he doesn't put it quite so starkly as that, it is an important reminder. And that's why I think that one of the things that we're saying as a commission is there are some young people who have been alienated by the curriculum as it is now. There's some people definitely being alienated because Oracy is presented as being about fluency, and it isn't just about fluency. And there are some young people who are therefore kind of left behind, rather than exactly what we've just heard, this being about empowering all young people. And we can do that if what we're doing is to acknowledge that all of us change our language, we code switch according to context. It's what we do. And we celebrate the fact that we do that. And we say that you're as entitled as I am to have that particular skill set. And I think we're seeing off quite a lot of that deficit model accusation which is being put to us, because our starting point is, if Oracy matters, then it ought to be happening for every child of every background, however much their parents get. But, you know, taking this other question, there's another question here about behaviour. Fundamentally, it is easier in a classroom often to give people 20 questions and get them working through it in silence than it is to do the dialogic stuff. But the dialogic stuff is what gives you the deeper and richer learning and empowers the relationship between the child and the teacher ultimately. And that's why it needs to be a bigger part of teacher training, a bigger ongoing part of development, and empowering teachers to take more risks and to learn this stuff as part of their skill set, it seems to me. We are at a moment when we have to do that, I think.
Emily, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just thinking there, Jeff, about what you were saying about assemblies and things like that in your previous point. And actually, behaviour-wise, in our assemblies, we have three, two styles, still the same kind of head teacher at the front, the children are listening, and that, has its place. But we've also we have an Oracy assembly for every year group every week. So the children sit in circles and they have discussion points. And as the teacher, you are the facilitator of those discussions. And I've had lots of people come and visit, and every time they always say, they're so well behaved. And you think, well, this is a really tricky year group. And it's always that answer. And they're really difficult most of the time. But in our Oracy assembly, because they're doing so much talking and they're moving around, they've got gestures and they're changing groups, and it's really stimulating what they're talking and thinking about. There's really very few behavioural problems. This is where the children want to be in an Oracy assembly, because it's not just, that teacher at the front just talking to you and it's going like that. You're part of it. It feels buzzy. There's something happening here, when they're talking about things, and something's happening where we're getting to a point where it's getting deeper in thinking and learning. And so, it's not just behaviour, that's inclusion as well of children with really significant SEN. They can always participate with some support from adults, but often with support from each other, which I think is really good. And something we say at Pinnerwood is, I always ask the question, I say, whose responsibility is it to make sure that everyone's joined in, or everyone's said something, or everyone's participating in a way? And they always say, us. Yes, we're a collective and we're working towards something. So I think with behaviour, and there was it goes quite much deeper, I suppose, but I think it's about being brave, and it's about taking those risks in the classroom, because children do want to participate, like what you were saying, Sequinda, before, about they do want to express themselves, they do want to join in. You just have to give them the tools to do that, I think. Thank you.
Perhaps, Emily, as well, that's in part about building the right ethos in the classrooms, the right environment in which Oracy can flourish. So I mentioned the term community of inquiry in a P4C context earlier, where we're consciously trying to build that community, that safe space in which young people feel they can make their beginnings. And building on what Jeff said, it's not all about presentational talk, about polished middle-class presentation or what have you. It's about children being willing to share their half-formed ideas, their beginnings, their starting points that we can work on and build together. And so we have to work, and it takes time, I think, to build the climate in which children feel safe to do that. Using a set of ground rules can help to establish that environment. And so, of course, can the teacher's attitude. And I think as a teacher, I always want to say to the children, look, this teaching and learning business, it's a two-way process. It is inherently a dialogic process. I can't teach you until I've understood what you've understood, what you think. So I'm not trying to trip you up. I really genuinely need to understand what you've understood from what I've tried to teach you, and trying to build that ethos over a period of time, I think is really important. But I think also the children of all backgrounds and abilities, when they understand that you genuinely want to hear their voice is important to the teaching and learning process, that their perspective is valued and is important, they start to feel present in the classroom, and their confidence, I think, really builds. And I think that's an important thing.
Joe, could I just do a 1-minute response to that question from Mike about true change requires a change in the programme of study? Can I do it really, really quickly? If you don't mind. Whichever government comes in, and I think we all kind of know who's coming in, there will be a review of the curriculum. There has to be. This curriculum's been in place now for 12 years. I think what's likely is that stuff will be taken out rather than new stuff being put into it. I think there is a caution with Labour that they don't want to spook the profession, and therefore I don't think on the first day of a Labour government the whole of the curriculum will be thrown into the air. Indeed, if I was advising them, which I'm not, I would be saying, why don't you start with the two subjects that particularly we should be concerned about, English and maths? Because for a third of young people to get to the age of 16 and to be given a grade 3, which, as Nick Gibb put it to me when I said, what do you call that? If you call a grade 4 a standard pass, what do you call a grade 3, Nick? And he said, presumably it's a good fail. We have to do better than that. And starting with English and maths would show the Secretary of State, a new Secretary of State, she's on the side of standards in the most fundamental subjects, but with a timeline to say, and then we will review other parts of the curriculum and build Oracy in the way that we've talked about across all of those. That would be my advice to them. But there is going to be that review, Mike, and I think it will be announced in the first week of a new government.
Thank you very much for addressing Mike's point. There were a couple that we've not managed to answer. I hope actually, Helen, your question about behaviour was covered actually, I think, in that last session. But very, very quickly, Sequinda and Emily, where can people go if they want to know a little more about what you've been doing at your school and how you like really easy for steps for practical steps for implementing Oracy? Very, very quickly, where can they go?
I think there was a specific question about Shakespeare. So that's the Shakespeare Schools Foundation. So you do have to pay, I think it's about 1,800 a year. And then you have access to abridged plays for 30-minute plays in their resource library. And you get help with putting on Shakespeare productions in your school. You're part of, you get to perform them in a professional theatre, and you get some feedback in terms of the directors of the Shakespeare Schools Foundation will give you a bit of tips as well. So it's well worth doing that. In terms of speech making, I'll let Emily answer that. I mean, we are very happy to share our speech making units. I don't think they're perfect. We create them ourselves, but happy to share them.
Thank you. Emily.
Yeah, absolutely. Us as well. And I would always say, come and visit us. That's also, you're all welcome. Of course you are. But I don't want to be a plug. But we are a Voice 21 school, and we have done all our training through Voice 21. And last year I did the Voice 21 Oracy leadership program. So, I don't want to wave their flag, but also Oracy Cambridge do really great stuff as well. And I think if you're nervous about where to begin, it is useful to go with a company, because it's step by step. You can either focus on your classroom practice and it be that personally or as a whole school, or whether it's you want to start big and go school culture, right? We're all going to change assemblies, but Google is your friend as well, I would say. Like, there's some really great stuff that people are sharing. Even if you just search an Oracy activity Key Stage 1, there's loads of really good stuff. But yeah, of course, try and connect with your local schools as well who are doing Oracy, because we're all part of this team together and it's about sharing best practice. So yeah.
Thank you everybody for staying on. I know we've run over a little bit. I guess we should also say, check out Generation Global if you work in a secondary school, and also you would want people to look at P4C. Is that right, Neil? Yeah, okay, great. So closing remarks. We've heard how Oracy can build healthier, more inclusive classrooms. Why on earth would we not want that? Oracy, an important tool for recruitment and retention, one of the huge intractable issues facing the system at the moment, because it empowers teachers. It reminds them of their craft and their professionalism and gives them agency. Oracy is important for moving from knowledge to understanding. It will build stronger democratic processes, and people or young people will be able to engage more fully in our democracy. It will build communal stability. Again, why wouldn't we want that? It seems to empower just about everybody, the students, the teachers alike, and gives them confidence. It's a skill and competency for life. And we've heard that it could possibly improve behaviour as well. So yeah, if you're inspired, I hope that you are. I definitely am. Check out the podcast. Check out all of those things we mentioned earlier about P4C, Generation Global. Check out Sequinda's school and Emily's school and Voice 21, and enjoy your Oracy journey. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you, panelists.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.